What's going on, guys? Wade here. What's going on, guys? Wade here. We are out in Burlingame, Kansas this morning. We're expecting a really great crowd today. There's some really terrific headstones that are here that we're going to get to work on. We're going to teach people how to do conservation work and how to clean headstones. So stay tuned and see what we can do.
The area was settled as Council City in the territorial era. Then Burlingame came about in 1857. They had an older cemetery that was just to the west of town, and then they moved it here in about 1861, I believe.
You can see they definitely have some drainage issues in these older sections here with the big puddles around the stones and everything. So I've been working in graveyards starting in the 80s, mid-1980s into the 90s. I was a subcontractor. That quickly led me into becoming a grave digger because there was a need for it. Throughout the 80s and 90s, I was working in some of the older kind of colonial, pre-colonial regions in Connecticut where I happen to be from. So over the last 2 decades, I've been specializing in historic restoration, preservation of cemeteries, graveyards, historic masonry, and related things. This is a marble stone. The older stones in here, a lot of them are going to be marble, and then the more recent ones are going to tend to be granite. And there's also some other material on the bases especially. This is a pretty typical marble tablet. It's 2-inch thick. You could call it slab stock. And this is in a keyway, and so that means the stone fits into a base, and so it's like a notch. It's called a socket. It could be called a bunch of things. It could be called a slotted base, a socket base. Actually, the recess in it is a mortise, and the stone is a tenon. They fit together, and so there's a bunch of different words you can use for that. And so these stones are really common all over America, even into Canada. Previous to the bases being used, the tablet stones tended to be one piece and just stick in the ground. About a third of the stone is underground. Different materials tended to be used before the marble became popular in the 1800s. Before the marble was used, it was generally local materials, tended to be sedimentary stone that was easier to work, and these materials were softer and they were easier to hand carve. But as time went on, marble became the stone of choice, and then they started to use bases like this. So this is a really typical kind of situation. Unfortunately, these stones tend to break off oftentimes, especially as they get older. They get weaker, more friable, they call it, and they get a lot of like airspace in it. They get more brittle, basically. There was a tradition in many parts of America, pretty much all over the country really, on the older, and I'm using this term loosely, but kind of pre-granite especially, and the older monuments, they tended to use a lower base, the one that goes into the ground in many situations of a regional material. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes if things are sandstone or limestone. The difference is that limestone starts out as shells like clams, oysters, shellfish, you know, that many people like. All those shells are white, pure white. That's calcium carbonate. Those organisms don't live that long. Those shells break down. Basically, they get crushed, compressed, and they turn into limestone on the bottom under salt water on ancient oceans. Now, sandstone is the freshwater kind of counterpart to limestone, and so sandstone is like a compressed laminated material from sands and natural mineral binders, clay, silicates, depending on the situation. Sandstone is under river and lake bed. This is marble. There was also a finial. That would be a closed urn. Sometimes they're open. And the thing that most people don't realize, but we can see some indications of it here in more arid areas, is that these were all polished and shiny when they were new. This is beyond repair pretty much because the base is disintegrating. There's a term in conservation they'll use called inherent vice, which means that the materials that actually it was constructed out of did not hold up and stand the test of time. There's variable levels of what we could work around. I mean, if you were really determined, if this was a founding father stone and they said, we want to save every last inch of it, we could do something with it, but it's not practical. On a higher end, if it was a family paying for it, they could have a new base made. made, and we could do that with a historic stone. We could also go to a modern monument company and make a new lower granite base, probably unpolish it. We could, if someone wanted to spend more, we could put architectural elements on it, like put a drop wash on it that has the angles to match the historic. Also, on a much less expensive and practical option, we could cast a lower base out of a concrete, and we could do that in a form, like in a garage, and bring it here, or we could do it right on the site. But ultimately, this needs a lower base to rebuild it off of, or it's not going to be able to be structurally sound. It's going to have issues.
It's Wendy Babbitt.
Wendy Babbitt, president of the Osage County Historical Society. My husband and I have our own cultural resource business, and so history is kind of our life.
So how did you get involved with the cemetery here and then also with the Historical Society?
So in 2012, I brought a bunch of homeschool kids out to Burlingame Cemetery, and we documented all the Civil War veterans.
Okay.
Here.
And how many are here?
At least, I would say, close to 250.
Okay.
Some of them marked with the GAR markers, some of them not. And so we documented all the veterans that were here. That was in conjunction with a project for the State Historical Society. And
amazing.
Turn over all your information to them and they
Yeah.
post it on their website.
Yeah.
Because of that, in order to get the kids, the students really interested,
Yeah.
I would research some of the veterans.
Did you come up with any interesting stories of folks that are buried here, that are veterans?
Yes, and one of the things that really caught my interest was the United States Colored Troops veterans.
Yes, okay.
Here at Burlingame Cemetery, there's a high concentration
Okay.
of USCT veterans.
Yeah.
There's probably like 5 black men, and then also about 5 officers. So
Really?
they would be white.
Okay. So you found, and this was with work with school children.
Mm-hmm.
How old were the kids?
At the time, they were ranging probably from about 8 to preteens, early teenagers. We had done different cemeteries here in Osage County.
Yeah.
And so Burlingame was the last one. It was July and August was
Yeah.
when we were here.
Yeah.
And so it was really hot.
The hot days, yeah.
And so by that time, we only had about 10 students that were doing it.
Yeah.
But they were super excited.
That's amazing. So that's a lot of individuals that served in the Colored Troops Regiment.
Yes, and it turns out it's because Burlingame, when it was established in the territorial era, first as Council City and then later as Burlingame in '57, they were an abolitionist community.
Okay.
And so much so that when the different Southern sympathizers would go through, there was always a threat of an attack. And so they had a target on their heads usually. And so because it was an abolitionist community, then that's why Kansas was very intentional about choosing their officers, their colored troop regiments. And so they wanted those officers to be totally abolitionists in their belief systems. And so that's why there's a high percentage of officers here.
Couple things to note. The color of the stone under here is really white, so that means it hasn't been broken that long. We can also tell how long it's been broken approximately by how sharp this edge is, and we have pretty sharp edges, so it's pretty recent break, because eventually this will all start to get moldy and, you know, algae on it and stuff. We can see the inscription doesn't start till way up here. The ideal repair on this would be, from my perspective, first of all, this base can be dug up and raised significantly, and we'll be doing some of that today, and basically we'll be digging around it, levering it up incrementally, and packing gravel, crushed stone under it to get it drier, more solid. Here's a previously repaired stone, and so this is a really good example. This has pins under here. This is previously broken and repaired. Now, additionally, there's secondary damage occurring from the pinning, and so this is kind of a great example to show you. In some situations, many of the things that I end up working on have been previously repaired. When there's been previous repair work, sometimes it's a can of worms, and also the worst case scenario is if they use like a pure Portland cement as a glue, because then it doesn't come off. It'll act as a glue for a while, but eventually it'll fail. And then once it fails, it's really hard to get off. In some situations, impossible, because it's so much harder than the stone, especially if the stone is marble.
Of the colored troops that are there, or are there any other noteworthy individuals that are buried here?
Yes, I believe one of the cool ones, at least for Kansas history, there's a Rooks County.
Okay.
And he was a private in the Civil War. And after the Civil War, when they were expanding Kansas and organizing the different counties out west, they were looking for different names. And Rooks, it's unique because There's not too many counties that are named after privates, and he was a private.
Was he part of the U.S. colored troops, or was he in a regiment that was serving under the Kansas flag?
He was serving with Company I of the 11th Kansas, which was mustered out of Burlingame.
Got it.
In part before all the territorial settlers came in with the Kansas-Nebraska Act after the area was opened. This was part of the Shawnee Reservation. The Shawnee came here in the 1830s. Actually, Burlingame was settled because there were Shawnee cabins located here. The Shawnee typically settled along waterways and along trade routes.
That's amazing, amazing history that you're able to share with that. What work is a historical society doing along that line to preserve that history as well? You know, typically we think of historical societies as preserving sort of the white tradition of the settlers. You know, is there some work that's being done or programs that you have in place to preserve their history as well?
Well, and that's one of the things that we are already connected to the Sac and Fox right now, as far as we exchange information with that tribe. Linden, where the Osage County Historical Society is located, is within the former Sac and Fox Reservation, and so we try to maintain a tie with the tribe just to find out what they're up to, share what we're up to.
You could look at something like this and say, without intervention, this is gonna fall. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So what we want blocks low down, like this. I'm gonna have much better leverage because there's a block under there. Now I can just pry this. You're gonna get more leverage with a bent angle chisel bar. You can maximize your lifting potential. Gravel like this is good, but it has all this airspace in it. And so we're gonna add the sand to fill in the space between this gravel. Plumb is up and down, level is perpendicular 90 degrees. And so we could plumb it, and I still didn't go far enough, okay? So we'll go a little further that way now. We're also leaning this way. I'm gonna get the heavy stuff, and then I'm gonna use a small stainless steel brush under it also. All epoxies are affected by temperature. So what I'm gonna do is just go under at 4 contact points now. I wanna keep it thick though. I don't wanna thin it out to linguine. We don't want spaghetti. We just want it to fill the joint. And it's 4 contact points. Now I'm gonna take the setting compound. Some people have the philosophy that you should only use mortar for this. I disagree. I think that's a messy way to do it. Just make sure everything looks pretty well aligned right now. You can go ahead and trim the compound. We can do this with some different tools, but a tuck pointer tends to work well for this. This is a wood chisel, and we can trim the lead. Tap this under. So go ahead and let's see if we can do one more tip. Good, right there. That's good height. Let's see if we can move this. It's gonna be hard so high to move it like this, but we're gonna give it a shot. Oh, wow. Yeah, we should take a wire brush and clean that right now while it's moved, because it's got algae, lichen, whatever under there, mold. The bar is not a good angle. So get the bar in. Yeah, it's going to give you much more leverage and it's less likely to slip. We could put some epoxy putty under there. We can just put the level right here. And that way it's pretty close. It should come up a little on this side. Actually, it's not bad. It's just a tiny bit high. A couple things about this epoxy putty. Unlike most epoxies, it'll mix with water. Additionally, it'll clean up with water before it cures. So we could actually clean any mess we make. It's not gonna bond to the stone. So it's a lot different than most epoxies. We could also chisel some of this junk away and do a little better repair, but even stopping short of that, we could come in here. This will strengthen it. We could do the same thing here. It already has all this epoxy under it, so instead of doing any removal, this will be better if it's wet. We could also use this side. Now we could even take some of that junk of theirs off, but you know, this looks better than theirs, and it also is stronger. And we could then fill in this loss.